What winters really looked like in 1970s Britain? What winters really looked like in 1970s Britain was nothing like today's mild drizzle and central heating comforts. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it left memories that no modern winter could ever match. And once you see how they lived it, you might wonder if we've lost more than we gained. The 1970s felt much colder. The 1970s weren't only cold in temperature, they were cold in spirit too. Britain stumbled through an energy crisis, and that meant homes felt every shiver twice over. Coal was scarce, heating oil prices soared, and families counted every lump in the scuttle like gold. Then came the three-day week of early 1974. To save electricity, the government ordered businesses to cut power use, leaving whole towns plunged into darkness several evenings a week. Factories closed early, pubs shut their doors, and living rooms flickered with paraffin lamps while the telly sat dead in the corner. If you were lucky enough to have central heating, it often sat idle because the bills were eye-watering. Many households leaned on paraffin heaters that filled rooms with a sharp smell, or storage heaters that gave out warmth at the wrong time of day. Families wore coats indoors, children did homework by candlelight, and kettles never left the hob. People don't exaggerate when they say winters back then felt harder. The chill seeped into your bones, but so did the worry. Will the lights stay on tonight? Will the pipes freeze again? It wasn't just weather, it was a test. Decade timeline beats. The 70s had a nasty habit of reminding Britain who was boss. The winter of 1970 to 71 saw deep snow sweep across England and Wales, cutting off rural communities and shutting schools for weeks. Roads became treacherous ice rinks, and thousands of commuters abandoned cars on motorways that turned into overnight camps. Fast forward to January 1978. A brutal storm system roared in from the North Sea, slamming into the East Coast. Entire seaside towns like Great Yarmouth and Scarborough vanished under snow squalls. Ferries sat marooned, and fishing fleets tied up for days as gales and ice locked harbors tight. And then came the big one, the blizzards of early 1979. Scotland's borders, the Pennines, and even Cornwall faced snow so relentless that villages were cut off for more than a week. Farmers dug tunnels to reach their cattle. Postmen strapped sacks on their backs and hiked miles to deliver a few letters. Newspapers called it the winter of discontent's icy grip, and for once the headline wasn't exaggerating. Across Britain, drifts climbed over rooftops, buses vanished beneath white walls, and soldiers were called in with helicopters to drop supplies to stranded hamlets. These weren't picturesque postcard moments. They were winters that shut down motorways, froze train lines, and forced a generation to toughen up. Ask anyone old enough, they'll tell you the 70s made modern winters look like a damp rehearsal. Heat at home. In the 70s, keeping warm indoors was a constant battle, and everyone had their own tricks. Central heating hadn't reached most houses yet, so the fireplace remained the heart of the home. Coal scuttles sat proudly by the hearth, filled after a chilly trek to the coal shed, and a box of kindling was always close by. Lighting the fire was a daily ritual. Roll up newspaper, balance the sticks, hope the draft caught. Paraffin heaters, with their unmistakable whiff, were another option, though they made parents nervous about safety. Night storage heaters arrived with the promise of cheap overnight electricity on Economy 7, glowing faintly in the corner. They worked, sort of, but by dawn the heat had seeped away, leaving mornings just as icy as before. To fight the drafts, families lined their doors with sausage-shaped excluders, stuffed towels into the cracks, and drew heavy curtains before tea. Bedrooms were the coldest. Many people remember waking to find ice traced on the inside of the windows, delicate patterns that looked pretty until you had to climb out of bed. Hot water bottles were essential, filled with scalding water, wrapped in a jumper, and slipped under the sheets. Sometimes children got two, one for the feet and one for hugging, and almost every fireguard doubled as a clothes horse, hung with socks, underwear, and school uniforms that never quite lost their dampness. If you were lucky, the living room stayed cozy, but step out into the hallway, and the chill hit you like a wall. Streets and transport. Outside, winter reshaped daily life. Council grit bins stood like silent sentries on street corners, full of salt and sand. Neighbors would dip in, scattering handfuls across frozen pavements before school or work. Yet rural bus routes still stopped running as soon as snow settled. Whole villages became cut off, forcing people to walk miles along icy roads. Drivers had it worst. Jackknifed lorries were a familiar sight on upland passes, blocking roads for hours. Smaller cars were abandoned at awkward angles, tires spinning uselessly. Windscreens froze inside as well as out, so drivers scraped at both sides with an old bus ticket or a library card. Radiators under the bonnet struggled, heaters in the cabin blew out air that was barely lukewarm, and gloves stayed on until you reached your destination. British Rail didn't fare much better. Intercity trains limped along iced points, timetables unraveled, and passengers huddled under coats as condensation dripped from windows. Stranded travelers queued at drafty stations for buses that never came, stamping their feet to keep circulation going. Yet for children, it could be magical. Busy streets fell silent enough to sledge down, the crunch of tires replaced by the swoosh of a tea tray converted into a toboggan. Snowball fights broke out on corners that were usually choked with traffic. Even the sight of a double-decker bus skidding sideways felt more thrilling than alarming when you were watching from the safety of the curb. School life. If you managed to get there, school was no escape from the cold. Radiators, when they worked, barely took the edge off. Most pupils kept their coats on through lessons, and gloves only came off when absolutely necessary. Cloakrooms turned into damp caverns of steaming scarves and woolly hats. Though nothing ever dried properly before it was time to put them back on. Packed lunches suffered too, sandwiches sweated in cling film, apples turned icy, and by the time the dinner bell rang, food was often stone cold. A thermos flask filled with hot soup felt like treasure. Teachers sometimes gave up and let classes gather around the hot water pipes when they clanged on, pupils pressing palms against them as if they were radiators in miniature. Snow days, though, were the highlight. When the drifts grew too deep, schools simply closed, sending children running out to build snowmen, race on sledges, and hurl snowballs until gloves froze stiff. But more often, lessons carried on, breath misted in the classroom air, ink pens clogged from the chill, and exercise books needed extra sheets of graph paper just to stop the pages from smudging. Those who grew up then still remember the sound of boots squeaking through slush in the corridor, and the peculiar misery of sitting at a desk shivering while trying to copy down spellings. It was grim at the time, but in memory it has become part of the texture of those winters. Work and wages in winter. By late 1978, cold and unrest had fused into one giant headache for Britain. The Winter of Discontent, from September 1978 to February 1979, was legendary for a reason. Public sector strikes swept the country. Bin men, grave diggers, hospital cleaners, and ambulance crews all walked out. Ford workers had already forced a 16.5% pay rise in autumn 1978, crushing the government's 5% cap. Then, in January 1979 alone, an estimated 1.5 million public sector staff downed tools in the largest stoppage since 1926. The streets told their own story. Leicester Square piled high with uncollected rubbish. Hospitals ran skeleton services, emergency cases only. People queued for wheelie bins, hospitals, even funerals. I once read how in Liverpool, bodies went unburied for days, an unimaginable disruption. These strikes weren't abstract, they shaped everything. Bin collections vanished from your street, so trash built into mini mountains. Hospital appointments got bounced or cancelled. Even your football tickets might go unused. It felt like life was gridlocked by silence rather than traffic. Weather culture of the era. Weather wasn't just a topic for small talk, it was an art. The BBC's forecasters stood behind maps dotted with magnetic symbols. You'd spot Bill Giles, Jack Scott, or Bert Ford placing little suns or snowflakes live on screen. Those tiny magnets clicked into place by hand. Sometimes they slipped, spelling FOG instead of DOG. That was TV charm. Computer graphics didn't arrive till 1985, but to kids back then, it all felt magic. At home, families watched the weather forecast like a ritual, and many had a barometer in the hallway, watching the needle dropped more than once before a cold snap. Around bedtime, the shipping forecast came on Radio 4. Its call sign orchestration, Viking 40s, Dogger, was often read by Peter Jefferson, and that soothing rhythm was as calming as any lullaby. The forecast wasn't just for mariners, it was bedtime atmosphere, island nostalgia, way beyond practical weather. Now we swipe apps, animated radar, instant alerts. Back then, a forecaster's tone and the shipping forecast's measured names gave you time to brace yourself for the cold. Football in the pools. Winters weren't gentle on football. Frozen pitches, icy fog and snow meant mass postponements across the leagues. On Saturdays, you might wake to announcements that local fixtures were off before you'd even had breakfast. Pools addicts had to wait, and if Saturdays couldn't go ahead, the pools panel, a group that judged match outcomes, would step in to allocate results. For fans, that meant no standing in a packed cop, no muddy boots, no roar of "Come on, you Reds." Instead, your local chippy became a refuge where people clutched newspapers, swore over the postponement notice, and wondered when the game would actually happen. The panel's decisions felt distant and unsatisfying, like reading a result rather than living it. Compare that with today. Undersoil heating, real-time postponement alerts on your phone, VAR replays, and your match stats before kickoff. Then, pause mattered. Half the game's magic came from waiting, hoping, planning. Food and fashion. When the frost settled, your wardrobe and your tea both had to pull doubles. People wore heavy Aran knit jumpers, think chunky cables and coastal warmth. On top, it wasn't uncommon to see someone in a donkey jacket, a thick wool coat with leather shoulder patches, straight off a miner or a rail worker. Wellies went over flares for trudging through slush, making a squeak with every step. At bus stops, commuters hugged thermos flasks like lifelines, filled with tea or, better still, soup. Simple is what warmed you. Tinned tomato soup poured into the flask, or thick, creamy bread and butter tea. That's tea with a slice of buttered bread dunked right in. Sundays meant a steamed pudding, maybe spotted dick or treacle sponge, a sweet hot hug on a plate. Today we have underfloor heating, techie fleece, and baristas making oat lattes. But back then, staying warm was practical, tactile, and through human. Shops and shortages. Winter wasn't just cold, it pinched your everyday access to things. If you wanted coal, you queued. Coal merchants' vans would roll in, and people formed lines in snow and drizzle to buy enough for the hearth. Paraffin, gone by noon. 1 minute the corner shop had it, next minute they'd closed the shutters. Those mom-and-pop grocers became lifelines. If lorries couldn't navigate drifts on rural roads, the village corner store stepped up. Mrs. Whitaker, in my memory, would open early, brewing tea for frozen delivery drivers who'd park by the step. She'd hand out slices of cake with tins of baked beans and sugar sachets. Makeshift generosity before convenience stores showed up. Now we click our phones and have orders arrive by drone. Back then, when the snow piled up, you walked, you waited, and you relied on people, not algorithms. Community warmth. When the cold got unbearable, communities stepped up. Local church halls opened as warm rooms. Families wandered in, coats dripping, for a cuppa and a chair by a paraffin stove. In Lancashire villages, parents gathered on local sledging hills, keeping thermoses of tea and bovril in place while kids cheered and slid. Neighbors pooled resources. If someone's firewood or kindling ran low, others dropped over a few logs. Candle shortages, often, but folks shared spares or communal lighting gathered around the kitchen table, telling stories while packages thawed. This wasn't policy or PR. It was survival wrapped in practicality. Compare that with modern life, where we text instead of talk, and our front door is more likely to be a video feed than a neighbor's voice. Back then, community warmth literally meant warmth, and it was honest, brave, and kind. Little household dramas. Winters in the 70s were full of small crises that felt huge at the time. Pipes burst whenever the mercury dipped too low, frozen water expanding and cracking brittle old metal. Families scrambled with buckets, making a mess, praying the leak didn't stretch into the night. Meanwhile, milk deliveries arrived in glass bottles, and you'd find cream hats floating on the doorstep, a cold promise that your breakfast would still be okay. Come morning, you'd wrestle with frozen door locks. Keys clicked uselessly before you turned the handle, and that meant heading to school or work late. cheeks flapping like birds in blast-frozen winter. Every night, laying out tomorrow's clothes by the fire became ritual. Jeans, school shirt, coat, everything touching the warmth so you wouldn't have to dress in icicles. It was all necessity, touching life with palpable tension and warmth, gestures now replaced by the hum of central heating. Homes back then were drafty, often meeting only 1970s insulation standards. Today, more than half still do, costing owners up to £380 a year. In wasted heat, central heating, which began spreading in the late 1970s, transformed life. What used to be a single warm room became whole house comfort. By 2003, 92% of homes had central heating, compared to just 31% in 1970. Average indoor temps rose from 12 degrees Celsius to 18 degrees Celsius. Double glazing, almost unheard of in 1970, took off in the 1980s. By the 1990s, over 60% of homes had it. These days, not only is glazing better sealed and more efficient, but insulation standards and building materials have improved too. Blackouts are rare, heating's controllable with a tap, and big drafts are a memory. Still, I'd love to hear your experiences. Tell us, where did you live in the 70s? Did your windows frost up? How did you keep your toast from freezing before breakfast? Share a winter memory from your town.